Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Indianapolis, one of the biggest motorsports places you will go to in America, aside from Daytona. Home of the Indianapolis 500 and many other racing divisions. We have the Indy Road Course race for the Indy cars, and of course this weekend we had IndyCar and NASCAR come together in one weekend to have a doubleheader on Saturday, and the big boys took to the road course on Sunday where there was so much strategy mixed in with a lot of green flag action and an underdog taking home the victory. Let's get into all that went down at the Indy Road Course. Number 1, Michael McDowell and Front Row Motorsports punched their ticket to the playoffs with a victory at the Indy Road Course. McDowell and the 34 team were unbelievable yesterday as they captured the Verizon 200 at the Brickyard, holding off Chase Elliott, Daniel Suarez, Tyler Reddick, and Alex Bowman for the victory. Michael McDowell has been known to be a very, very good road course racer throughout his entire career. Ever since he's, moved up through the progressions of the NASCAR series over the years, especially his tenure with Front Row Motorsports. He's been very well known for running in the top 10, top 15 at times. Haven't really had winning race cars, but they certainly have had top 10 race cars. Well, this time they brought a winning race car, and they were strong. Right off the truck, in practice and qualifying, McDowell felt confident in his interview when asked about his car, saying, "We got a legit shot at this victory." And they showed it on Sunday. From the green flag, they went all the way into the top 5 before the first and only caution of the race came out. And then he jumped himself up to second on the restart and started pressuring Daniel Suarez the first stint of stage 1. And then the closing laps of stage 1, he took the lead from the 99 and won the stage. The first stage win not only for McDowell, but for Front Row Motorsports as well. From there on, he just continued to keep pulling away for the most part by maintaining about a 1.5 to 2 second gap over second place or third place in that matter. And then when we had green flag pit stops, McDowell still held the lead, even though there were a couple guys on different strategies. He held the lead and had to hold off the likes of Elliott and Suarez for the majority of the race. But he never put a foot wrong. He did everything right. He nailed every braking zone. He nailed every straightaway as far as acceleration. He was on fire yesterday in that number 34 team. And then we had the final green flag pit stop of the race, and once again, the team executed on pit road. And he was managing his tires the final few laps of the race, knowing that there was a chance that there could have been a caution, but there never was. But he managed the tires well. Even though the 9 car closed that last lap and was given everything he had, the 34 still had a comfortable enough gap at the time by managing the tires to hold off for the victory. This is McDowell's second career win. Do you want to know where his first career win came from? It was 2 years ago to open up the 2021 season when he won the Daytona 500. Granted, obviously, it's a super speedway race, and obviously anybody can win there, but he has been strong on super speedways as well. And it was, of course, a race where we had limited fans because we're still recovering from the COVID pandemic. And of course, we had a big wreck earlier in the race, and then we had a rainstorm that halted it for a while, and we didn't resume until like late in the night. But McDowell was able to win the race when the top 2 wrecked right in front of him, and he got his first career win that night. And he was so elated when he won the 500. The one thing that he really missed cherishing that night was celebrating with his family. His family wasn't allowed to be at the track because of COVID restrictions. But this weekend, they were there, all of them, his wife and all of his children that they've adopted over the years. They were all together for that very special moment yesterday. And he was so emotional, overcome with emotions for a team that's not known really for running up at the front on a consistent basis. But over the last couple years, Michael McDowell and the 34 team in general have really stepped up their game as a race team. Of course, they won the Daytona 500 in 2021. They made the playoffs. The year after that, they didn't make the playoffs, but he put together his best statistical season thanks to his crew chief, Blake Harris, giving him good race cars and feedback. And of course, everyone was relatively new to the car at the time, and we were still figuring some things out. McDowell and the 34 team did very well last year. But then Blake Harris goes to join Hendrick Motorsports to be Alex Bowman's crew chief. So they get Travis Peterson. Guess what? Things haven't changed. They've still been a good top 15 race team for a lot of the season. And I felt like that they could point their way in until they had a rough outing at Michigan last week where they had a little damage in an early wreck and they weren't a factor for the most part. But they came to this weekend thinking, if we can have a good run and point ourselves up into the point in the top 16 at the end of the day, we could be in pretty good shape for the next 2 weeks because it's another road course and, of course, Daytona. Well, they upped that by winning yesterday, leading 54 of the 82 laps ran. I mean, the 34 team was so strong yesterday. And now McDowell's in the playoffs for the second time in his career, the second time for Front Row Motorsports, their third win as a race team. Things are just going well for this organization right now. Now, can they carry that momentum going forward the next 2 weeks? Absolutely, because, again, it's a road course, and McDowell's been known to run very well at Watkins Glen. And Daytona, again, he's won the 500 before, and he's always up there at the very end of the race when it matters most on super speedways. He's either finishing in the top 5 or the top 10. He has good race cars. There's a chance he could win the next 2 races and build those playoff points heading into the playoffs, now knowing that they're locked in. They were asked the question post-race, now that you focused on Darlington? They said, nope, we're focused on next weekend. We're gonna try to go win another one. I mean, they've got the speed and the capability to do it. So we'll see what they can do going forward. But it was just a special day yesterday for Michael McDowell and the 34 team as they are officially in the playoffs after winning at the Indy Road Course. Number 2, Chase Elliott, the road course king, comes up short. On a weekend where we felt like that Chase Elliott is going to be in the mix for the win because he's been very successful road courses, a 7-time winner on road courses, we felt like this could be the weekend for him to get things going after wrecking out early last week at Michigan. Well, this weekend at a track where most people felt like that this was not his best road course that we've been to, he actually did very well for himself as far as, lap runs in practice and qualifying in the top 3. And at the start of the race, he remained pretty much in the top 5 the entire race with the exception of the shuffling of pit stops and everything. But he remained in the top 3 for a majority of the race with McDowell and Suarez. And Elliott then took the lead during a stint of green flag racing when some of the guys in front of him pitted. He led a lap, then he came in and pitted, fell a little bit behind, but then rallied back up there and was able to catch up with Suarez and McDowell for the most part. He had one moment, though, where he was about ready to get to Michael McDowell, but then I think the tires started to go away a little bit, and then he got a little bit of a bump in the latter few corners by Suarez that kind of moved him out of the way. Didn't send him off course, which would have been a stop-and-go penalty in a certain section if you missed the corner, but he had to come in and make his pit stop, and then he was able to vault himself back up to second because Suarez had a problem with his pit stop, which we'll talk about. But Elliott was trying everything possible the last few laps of the race to catch Michael McDowell. He was as far back as 4 seconds at one point, and then with about 15 laps to go, he was then 2.5 seconds back. So he was doing everything he possibly could to catch the 34 car. But at times, it seemed like McDowell at the time was using his tires up for the most part, and Elliott was using his. Then McDowell went into managing his tires, and Elliott started to rally just a little bit to get back up there. But while that was happening, they were running into some lap traffic because, again, it was a long green flag run, and we didn't have any cautions except for the first one early in the race at lap 6. Elliott did everything he could to chase down the 34 car of McDowell. But, again, those lap traffic cars, they were getting in the way, like Ricky Santos Jr., who was bumping into everybody late in the race, and Mike Rockenfeller in the 42 car. Like, I mean, I was going to believe why they wouldn't pull over because, like, once the leader gets by you guys and the guy behind you in second is kind of closing up, you kind of need to give way. But they didn't display the blue flags at all, which kind of surprised me. But Elliott was able to finally get by him with 2 laps to go in the intersection of the racetrack before they came back to the white flag. And he was gaining that last lap. Unfortunately, it was just a little too late. He might have needed one more lap, and things could have been very interesting. But that's the difference between trying to get a win and finishing in second place for the 9 car. Now, I'm sure, obviously, Elliott was a little disappointed because he felt like he had the speed in the car, and they fell a little bit short. But they should be encouraged. They haven't really had winning speed really since he came back from that injury earlier this year. But they've had some top 5 runs earlier in the year. And, of course, the last top 5 he had was at the Chicago Street Course because he took a strategy to stay out there and gamble to hope they have enough fuel to make it to the end, which they did despite all those late race yellows. But Elliott, the last couple weeks, have been kind of meh to rover around the top 10 to top 15. And, of course, they felt like they had a top 10 car last weekend until the tire went down and he hit the wall, knocking him out of the race. But this weekend, they had top 5 speed all day long and finishing in the top 3. They should be a little encouraged heading into next weekend because it's Watkins Glen, and that's his playground. He's won 2 of the last 4 times we've been there, and I have no doubt that the 9 car, they feel confident that they will be in the mix next weekend. And as a matter of fact, they feel more confident about Watkins Glen next weekend with their car than they did with this car this past weekend that they finished second with. So imagine what he could do next weekend. He could win and punch his ticket to the playoffs. But Elliott, despite all that, had to finish second, but still nonetheless a great performance and giving them some confidence heading into Watkins Glen next weekend. Number 3, Daniel Suarez. Strong start to the race, but faded late due to a pit mistake. Suarez started the weekend by winning the pole for the Verizon 200 at the Brickyard. That was his first pole of the season and the first pole for the team, Trackhouse Racing. They've never won a pole before. Oh, wait. Maybe they have? I don't think they have. But Suarez was very strong from the get-go, and he seemed to have a good car when he was out front. But then we got into a little longer run. he seemed to fade a little bit, and that's where McDowell and Elliott were catching him, and they were able to get the best of him. Then late in the race, at the start of the final stage, Suarez was gaining a little bit, and we had that moment where he bumped the 9 car into one of the final corners, moved him out of the way, and he took the second place spot. But then things came crumbling down on the final pit stop of the race, where he came into his pit box. They were changing the left side tires, and they were going around to change the right sides. They couldn't get the air hose out because it was stuck under the left front tire because the hose was curved, it was tangled, and stuck under the left front tire. And you can't tug it. It's not easy to tug an air hose when it's stuck underneath the tire on a car that weighs a ton. So they had to go back around, jack the car up, and then they let the air hose out, and they were able to go on the right side and change the tires. That cost them 5 seconds from where they were, and they fell back to as far as 8 seconds after that pit stop, and therefore completely out of contention for the victory. They had the speed in their car to probably win the race, or at least finish second, but they were relegated to third because of that pit mistake. What could have been the story if they didn't have that air hose get stuck underneath the left front tire? We will never know, but they should also, like Elliott, be encouraged with the speed that they brought heading into Watkins Glen next weekend, which Suarez has been very good at in the past. He hasn't had winning speed, but he's certainly run well there and has finished in the top 5, top 10. So he could be a factor next weekend when we get to the Glen. But despite all that, a great run yesterday, even though they had a late race pit mistake that cost them a chance at the victory. Number 4, road course ringers. Some did well, some not so much. Starting off with the man that won last year's race, Tyler Reddick. The man who, that was his last year, well, it was his second to last win with RCR last year. Reddick won the second ever Indianapolis road course race, and I felt like coming this weekend, he would be one of the factors that we talk about for the win. They started outside pole, stay in the top 5, and then stay in the top 5, but they faded back from the top 3. They weren't as strong as the 34, the 9, or the 99 the entire race. They were perhaps the 4th, 5th best car for the most part. But Reddick still was able to hold good drive position the entire day, and the pit crew did not make a single mistake. Remember, I got on them last weekend because they've been constantly shooting themselves in the foot with bad pit mistakes, whether they've left a lug loose on the left or right rear or whatever tire it was, and of course it had a flat and he had to come back in, and that took him out of contention, or speeding on pit road, any type of mistakes. They did not have any of that this weekend, and that's why they're able to come away with a nice 4th place finish. Not a win, but still a strong performance, and they were the best of the Toyota group. Of course, Rebel and Martin Truex Jr. finished in the top 10, but they weren't as good as Reddick was. But then again, Toyotas really didn't have anything for that Ford and McDowell, the 2 Chevys of Elliott and Suarez. Then we go to Shane Van Gisbergen, who made his first Cup start since winning at the Chicago Street Course early last month, where he won it on the 4th of July weekend at the Chicago Street Course in impressive fashion. He came in this weekend looking for a big opportunity to try to win his second career race and also have some fun. I definitely feel like he had a lot of fun, but he didn't really have the winning speed because they didn't qualify particularly well like I thought they would, and he ultimately admitted in his post-race interview that the guys that had been here before had more experience than me and probably were able to negotiate the track better than I did. It took him quite a few laps, but he was finally able to get into a little bit of rhythm and flow throughout the race and was able to come away with a nice 10th place finish. It's still a good result. Your first 2 starts as a driver who's coming over from supercars to run Cup cars, you got to win in a top 10? That's not a bad start for your Cup resume. And there's still the possibility he could be full-time in the Cup Series next year, or it could be 2025. We don't know. It's obviously his choice. Now, he may not want to do full-time Cup. He might just do intermittent races, all the road courses for Project 91 or a few other series races like Xfinity and Trucks, which he did Friday night at IRP, finishing 19th. Did pretty well for his first oval race. But SVG did very well yesterday. The same cannot be said, though, for AJ Allmendinger, the man who won the first ever Indianapolis road course race here at the Brickyard. I thought that he was going to be one of the guys that we talked about for the victory because he's such a good road course racer. This weekend, they sucked. They were bad. They didn't qualify well. They qualified in the 26th spot, which you don't expect from a man like Allmendinger and the caliber he has to run well at road courses and qualify well and practice well. But when we got into race trim, when we got into the race, he seemed to get a little bit more out of the car and got it up into the top 15, where I'm at the point thinking, okay, we're going to be talking about him in the top 10. But then we had a moment in the final corner in stage 2 where he was racing side by side with Ryan Blaney, and coming out of the corner, Blaney made contact, sending the 16 car around and up into the outer groove of the racetrack where NASCAR Turn 1 is for the oval portion of the track. We didn't have a caution. Allmendinger was able to get the car restarted, but unfortunately he lost so much time and he fell a lap down, finishing 26. He made a comment on his radio saying, if I get back to that 12, he's getting wrecked. Well, spoiler, he never got back to the 12 car at all, but they were bad this weekend. They're just flat out embarrassing performance from somebody who I know has been a very strong road course racer, and they did not bring their best this weekend. Now, going into next week in Watkins Glen, he's been very good there too, but they haven't had really winning speed. Now, they had a top 5 last year, so they could maybe turn things around next weekend, and he's very strong at Daytona when he's not getting involved in a wreck. But my confidence in Allmendinger as far as winning next weekend and the weekend after that, it's not there very high right now. After what we saw this past Sunday, they should be embarrassed, and they need to go back and figure out what they did wrong. I mean, first of all, you don't qualify 26 with the caliber that you've got and expect to find yourself trying to fight your way to the front to be ultimately getting taken out by a competitor racing hard with you in the final corner. I mean, that they should be absolutely embarrassed with themselves. But some of the good and bad for some of the road course racers that did very well, and then some that we've known to have success not have a great day at all yesterday. And number 5, the strategy and the racing at the Indy road course yesterday. Like I mentioned at the top of the video, we had one caution yesterday, and that was on the second lap of the race when Justin Haley and Joey Logano went side by side into turn 6. Logano and Haley are side by side in that corner where you can't really go side by side. Logano got on the curb, got a little loose, drifted up, and turned the 31 car around into the tire barrier, ultimately taking Haley out of any chance he had to possibly run well, because remember, he finished second at the Chicago street course. But they were out of contention. That was the only caution we had. After that, we were clean and green the rest of the way, because we introduced at the beginning of the year a new rule for the road courses and including street courses. No stage breaks. After we cross the line at the signal, the end of that stage, we keep on racing. No cautions. And guess what? It made it for an entertaining race yesterday between the strategy, between some of the front runners, them making their pit stops, and a couple guys gambling to stay out a few laps longer to try to get some stage points, like Denny Hamlin and Brad Keselowski did in stage 2, and they were able to get stage points. Hamlin got the stage win. Ultimately, when they did make their pit stops, they fell completely out of contention again, based on where they were running before their pit stops. But the strategy was very intriguing yesterday, and we had some good battles in the middle of the pack between 6th to 13th place. We had some phenomenal battles, guys like Kyle Larson, Chase Briscoe, Martin Truex, Christopher Bell, SVG, Chris Buescher, the man who won the last 2 races, Ty Gibbs, who recovered from a spin earlier, Ryan Blaney, Austin Cindric. We had some good battles in that section yesterday, but we also had a couple guys that were driving over their heads, like AJ Allmendinger Ricky Stenhouse Jr. when he kept running into the Rick Ware cars, whether it was Jenson Button or Andy Lally behind the wheel. That was pretty uncalled for. But and even getting into Kamui Kobayashi made his Cup debut yesterday. He just dumped him in turn 1. That was unacceptable. That should have gotten him parked. But despite all that, we had some interesting racing with the strategy yesterday mixed in for this type of racing. And of course, there's been the big conversation about what should we do going forward regarding Indianapolis. We want to keep it on the schedule, but are we going to do it the road course, or are we going to go back to the oval? Now, they did the tire test today for the oval, so I don't know how that went, but I'll go look at Twitter later and find out what we saw and maybe what to expect. But we could be back on the oval next year at this time, which should be interesting. But as Roger Penske, he not only owns a NASCAR team and Team Penske, but he owns the track as well, and IndyCar. It's his decision about what he wants to do, and talk to NASCAR about what should we do. Should we stay on the road course, or should we try the oval with this next-gen car and see if it puts on a good show for the fans? We shall see. But I felt like that the road course race yesterday was fun. And another reason why it was also fun, and we didn't have a whole lot of cautions, we just had that one caution. But when you watch the start of the race and the restart after that caution, we changed the restart box in the corner leading out of the final corner. The box was placed in a certain section into the final corner before it comes onto the main straightaway. Because if you remember last 2 years, the restart box was on the straightaway just a few feet before the start-finish line. And when they get on the gas, that gives everybody the opportunity to dive bomb 3, 4, 5 wide into turn 1. But the changing of the restart box prevented any of that yesterday. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And every single person I saw on Twitter also was a fan of it, because we didn't have that much calamity like we had the last 2 years in turn 1. It felt relieving for NASCAR to make that change. And I applaud them for that because it put on a good show yesterday, even with just one caution. But it was good. And you saw those drivers post-race. They were all, relatively exhausted. Not many of them were dehydrated, but there was some red on their face. Obviously, it's warm at this time of year, but that just goes to show you how much effort they put in for running 100 minutes of clean green flag racing without any cautions. Those guys put their best out there yesterday, and they did a very good job. I thoroughly enjoyed yesterday's race on the road course. Now, again, do we go back to it next year, or do we go back to the oval? That remains to be seen, but I thoroughly enjoyed what we saw yesterday. Now we're on to another road course in Watkins Glen in the lovely hills of New York. It should be a very entertaining race. Of course, the favorite entering that should be Chase Elliott, the man who got his first career cup win at that track in 2018 and then won again the following year. We didn't do it in 2020, but we ran the last 2 years, and it's been Kyle Larson. Even with Chase Elliott as a factor, you would expect those two and Martin Truex Jr. and AJ Allmendinger, if he can get it together, and Michael McDowell, who just won this weekend's race, to be up there contending for the win. But there are other guys that could throw their hat up there to put a challenge, like Alex Bowman, who got his first top five since his back injury this past weekend. Tyler Reddick, obviously, is a great road course racer. Kyle Busch, Joey Logano, who's won there before, even Kevin Harvick. So what should we expect next weekend? Well, as the super speedway of road courses, I should expect a lot of speed and a lot of interesting strategy for another road course, obviously, that will not have stage breaks. What will happen? We shall find out. But in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week and enjoy this video. Subscribe, like. Congrats once again to Michael McDowell, the 34 team, on their win at the Indy road course yesterday. Have a great week, everybody. Let's go racing!